All powers to oppressed people, African power to an African people, and black power to brother Yanga. Again, contributing, doing my part for the advancement, upward mobility, the liberation, freedom of black African people here in America. And my part is to inform. Political Education Committee. We believe informed people make informed decisions. We're on part 4 of Black Intelligetsia. If you have listened to the previous 3 parts in this series, then you will know we were coming from the works of Brother Muhammad Ahmad, one of my Jigga, one of my mentors. Honored to be able to say that, actually. And he is one of the founders, or the founder, of the Revolutionary Action Movement, R.A.M. And they were very vital in our revolution waged here in America. So, again, we're coming from Black Intelligetsia, part 4. The doctor writes, among the Black Intelligentsia, E. Franklin Frazier and Oliver C. Cox were among 2 of the most comprehensive social scientists to investigate some of the base causes of African American oppression. E. Franklin Frazier's historical analysis and studies of cultural differences in the African American bourgeois, the African American church, and the African American family have been a tremendous help towards laying the groundwork for a scientific African American ideology. In his Race and Culture, Contacts in the Modern World, Franklin states, the problem of nationalism among the colored peoples who have revolted against white demonization is not simply one of securing political power. The development of national consciousness is a long and difficult process, depending on the traditions and stages of social development of a people. The aim of all nationalistic movements is to acquire the status of a nation state. While Frazier goes on to explain why the African American bourgeois, unlike other colonial petty bourgeoisie, failed to transform itself into a nationalist intelligentsia, he exhibited the Garvey-Du Bois legacy, as many scholars did, as displaying confusion in their conclusions. Conclusions are the most important parts of ideology. Oliver C. Cox, on the other hand, is one of the most shunned African-American ideologists because he says that class and class exploitation are the basis of racial, national, and cultural oppression. Cox Caste, Class, and Race is a classic study today. Definitely. Oliver C. Cox's book on class exploitation, or the book is called Caste, Class, and Race, and he believes that class and class exploitation are the basis for racial and national cultural oppression. While Eric Franklin Frazier, E. Franklin Frazier, says that confusion, different traditions, and different stages of social development are what hinder the nationalistic, not aim, but the manifestation or the fruition of a national movement or a nationalistic movement. While Frazier goes on, I'm sorry, Du Bois, Cox, and Frazier, C.L.R. James, and George Padmore have been 5 major theorists of Black intelligentsia that have tried to formulate a scientific ideology for the persons of African descent. Let's give you those names again, just in case you want to write them down and go back and study your Black intelligentsia, or at least familiarize yourself with them. Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, Cox, Oliver Cox, Franklin Frazier, C.L.R. James, and George Padmore, 5 major theorists of Black intelligentsia that have tried to formulate a scientific ideology for the persons of African descent. These 5 men have laid the theoretical foundations for a scientific African American ideology. Du Bois, through historical analysis, has given us a historical and philosophical approach, while Cox, through his class racial stratification theory, has given the African Americans a construct for national analysis. And Frazier, with his sociological method of analysis, has given the African Americans a foundation of scientific empirical content. And Padmore has laid a political interpretation to social history. Wow. Between these five theorists, we seem to have these covered. Again, Du Bois, through historical analysis, has given us historical and philosophical approach, while Cox, through his class and racial stratification theory, has given African Americans a construct for national analysis. And Frazier, with his sociological method of analysis, has given the African Americans a foundation of scientific and empirical content. And Padmore has laid a political interpretation to social history. Paul Robeson, in the 1930s, 1940s, arose to speak of internationalism. He was a staunch fighter against U.S. imperialism. Harry Haywood and George Padmore and C.L.R. James each have contributed national and international historical analysis towards the foundation of African American ideology. Harry Hardwood's Negro Liberation is the best statistical-based account and argument that African Americans constitute a nation within a nation. Again, that book by Harry Hayward is Negro Liberation. Doctor says it is the best statistical-based account and argument that African Americans constitute a nation within a nation. In the Black Belt South, having the right to self-determination up to and including the right of succession. Wow. Padmore's Pan-Africanism or communism argues that Africans have been manipulated by orthodox Marxist states and should form internationals of their own. In recent years, Harold Cruz and James Boggs have both given critiques of contemporary African-American political thought. C.L.R. James, in The Revolutionary Answer to the Negro Problem in the U.S., this is C.L.R. James' book, quote, The Revolutionary Answer to the Negro Problem in the U.S., in 1948 stated, to paraphrase, the independent African-American struggle has a vitality and a validity of its own that has deep historic roots in the past of America and in the present struggles as an organic political perspective. The independent African-American movement is able to intervene with terrific force under the banner of democratic rights upon the general and social political life of the nation. Wow. Let's read that again, and I want that to kind of sink in. It says this independent African-American movement is able to intervene with terrific force under the banner of democratic rights upon the general social and political life of the nation. This is a big boon for the radical reformists. It's saying that this type of movement under this so-called democracy, it actually, according to Padmore's book, Pan-Africanism or Communism, says, no, I'm sorry. C.L.R. James, in his book, The Revolutionary Answer to the Negro Problem, says that the independent African-American movement is able to intervene with terrific force under the banner of democratic rights upon the general social political life of the nation. There again, we're talking about this, these reformists, these people, he's actually saying, and which I believe that every revolutionary, if they have studied revolution, must at some point come to the grips with the fact that radical reformism is going to be a first step in any step towards complete and total self-determination. It's going to be a first step. So he's saying that this democratic understanding provides that cover or provides the opportunity to move in force to make some changes upon general social and political life of the nation. More importantly, the doctor writes, it is able to exercise a powerful influence upon the revolutionary working class. The African-American struggle has a great contribution to make to the development of the proletariat in the United States and is a constituent part of the struggle for socialism. Bill Fletcher, an AFL-CIO intellectual, said in a recent interview, the African-American tends to be the most pro-union of any demographic people, and there are more African Americans in the unions and a percentage of our population than any other demographic group. 16 to 18% of the African Americans are in unions compared to 11% Latinos. And African Americans tend to be the most pro-union among African Americans, African American women. And this is Norman Otis Richards, Bill Fletcher in Toronto. This was an interview with Bill Fletcher in Toronto. And this interview actually was on October 23rd, 2005. So, the information is a little old, but we can build on that. I encourage to take this and begin to build on that, get updated statistics. Cruz, in two of his books, Crisis of the Negro Intellectual and Rebellion or Revolution, describes the internal cultural contradiction in the history of the movement and raises questions over direction. James Boggs, in his Racism and the Class Struggle, presents a strategy of workers from all nationalities in the U.S. to strive for people's power. In his manifesto for a Black Revolutionary Party, Boggs gives a very good political frame of reference to transform a political perspective into concrete organizational form. Boggs also forecasted the results of the increasing use of cybernation automation in the production process and listen, you guys, know the word, the tongue doesn't want to write. The deindustrialization of America. Okay, so Boggs in his book predicted in his analysis, I'm not even going to say predicted, just in his analysis came to the conclusion that he forecasted the results of the increasing use of cybernation and automation, computers, robots, in the production process, and the deindustrialization of America will lead to the development of an underclass in this American Revolution. Pages from a Negro's Workers' Handbooks. Absolutely, because it begins to squeeze out this proletarian class, this working class, the cybernization and automation. Malcolm X, Robert F. Williams, Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, James Forman, Huey P. Newton, Amari Baraka, and Manning Marble all talk about independent coalition politics solutions to the oppression of African Americans. Analysis of the Black intelligentsia. Within a 400-year span of many who are or were in a position to contribute in national political thought, there are basically 20 secular African American scholars have contributed to formulating a body of thought leading to the formation and scientific articulation of an African American ideology. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? Out of all of these people running around, our predecessors, all of these people running around, and all of these people that the oppressor would like to give you as a Black leader, or like to give you as a revolutionary leader, or a revolutionary theorist, tactician, ideologist. Dr. Muhammad Ahmad says that within a 400-year span of the many who are or were in a position to contribute in national political thought, there are basically 20. There are basically only 20 secular African American scholars that have contributed to formulating a body of thought leading to the formation and scientific articulation of an African American ideology. There are only 20 that have contributed to a body of thought that led to the formation and scientific articulation of an African American ideology. And I keep repeating that because that's heavy. That's heavy. Here's why this is important for me, for those that know me. And I really hope plenty are listening to these lectures, because this will save the chitter chatter for me. Because I'm looking at the list and I'm going to read the list. out of these 20, like if you know it's only 20, we won't be all over the place. A lot of times when we get these political educations or we talk to so-called revolutionaries, they're all over the place. Their ideology isn't a sound ideology. If it's an ideology at all, a lot more times than not, it's a philosophy or a theology or just their opinion. But knowing these 20 will give all power to the people. Knowing these 20 scholars will give us, it will limit senseless conversation, because when you're going to a revolution or you're going to that one that is about the advancement of Black Africans in America, then 9 times out of 10, if you go with one of these 20 scholars, the conversation is going to be relevant. Let's go through the 20 scholars. Frederick Douglass. And disclaimer before I start, because like Robert F. Williams said, the discussion isn't integration or segregation, but self-determination. So whether we agree with these people or not, their thoughts, their works have contributed to formulating an ideology that African Americans have followed or that have incorporated into an evolving and continuing growing ideology. But these scholars were the cornerstones. Let's start again. Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, E. Franklin Frazier, Paul Robeson, Oliver C. Cox, C.L.R. James, Harry Haywood, Richard B. Moore, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Harold Cruz, George Padmore, James Bogg, Dr. Nathan Hare, Kwame Ture, Amari Baraka, Malcolm X, Robert F. Williams, Huey P. Newton, and Manning Marble. Intelligentsias usually come from the educated stature. Most of the time, they come from the university students. And most of the social movements in the 20th century, politically motivated workers and university students have provided the theory, leadership, and cadre for the people's movement. This occurs when students, intellectuals from the working class or peasant backgrounds, sometimes hinging on the edge, often considered lower middle class, become impatient with the established order and begin to agitate for change. Actions that are often considered radical. Okay, so let's read this again. We're talking, Dr. now is telling us a lot, and this is section of it is analysis of the Black intelligentsia. We went over the 20 Black intelligentsia, and now he's telling us usually where this intelligentsia comes from and how they come about. And he says they usually come from the educated stature. You know, most of the time they come from university students, and most of the social movements in the 20th century, politically motivated workers and university students have provided the theory, leadership, and cadre for the people's movement. How does this occur? This occurs when students and intellectuals from working class and peasants backgrounds, often considered, they're often considered the lower middle class, become impatient with the established order and begin to agitate for change and actions that are often considered radical. They in turn commit class suicide. They in turn commit class suicide. They give up the petty bourgeoisie privileges they would have had if they remained conservative. And they unite with the working class and the peasant class, and they fight for the majority of the people's interest. These individuals are referred to as intellectual proletariat. The intellectual proletariat, and what is the proletariat is working class, the working man and woman. The intellectual proletariat is the element of the people that comes into consciousness of itself using its intellect and collective actions in relation to the power for the proletariat. The intellectual proletariat does not have to be a university student, but often are self-educated and writers, artisans, musicians, poets directly connected with and coming from the masses. Did you hear that, you? The intelligentsia the Black intelligentsia, the Black theorists, the Black strategists, those that contribute to solutions for the problem that face the millions of Black Africans here on the shores of North America, these people don't necessarily have to come from the universities. They don't have to be college students. It says, in fact, most often they're self-educated, and they're writers and they're artisans and they're musicians and they're poets directly connected with the coming from the masses. When the intellectual proletariat enters into consciousness, opposition with the established order, they make up the backbone for the social revolution and become the professional spokesperson for the masses in the struggle. The struggle then becomes a struggle for power between two intelligentsias, one representing the working class and the other representing the bourgeoisie. These intellectuals with the working class background see the contradictions, that their class cannot obtain power as a society presently exists, and that they identify with the working class interests. This process will occur at a rapid rate if there is a barrier keeping the intellectual proletariat from achieving their class interest. So what's happened? The intellectual proletariat is from the working class, and the intellectual proletarian has this insight. They're blessed with insight. I'm reminded of what Trotsky said. He said that revolution is sacred, revolution is spiritual. So there is no, and this is Leon Trotsky, by the way. So he said that there is a bond between the revolutionary and the masses that is a spiritual, a sacred bond. So what do we see here? So the intellectual proletariat, the intellectual from the working class, I would call it an anointing, a gift. They are given this thing to be able to see through the veils, to be able to see through the BS constantly presented and paraded in front of them, to try to make them either content with their lot in life or fearful to step outside and question the very real suppression and most times oppression that is affecting them. So it says, this intellectual frustrated sees these contradictions. They see that they're not of the bourgeois. They see that the way that the current system exists, that only a few, only a percentage will succeed, only a percentage will excel, and frustrated with the restrictions that are placed upon them, that it says that they should really receive based upon their class and stuff, frustrated with those restrictions. They clamor for a change. They begin the process of this revolution. They begin to articulate. They become the spokespeople. And it says that their opponent is the other intelligentsia. What is that? Bourgeoisie intelligentsia, the intelligentsia that's in favor of the current system and the status quo. They're talking heads. This is what the intellectual proletarian, the revolutionary, is facing. The doctor says again, and I'll reread, these intellectuals with working class backgrounds, see the contradictions, that their class cannot obtain power as the society presently exists, and they identify with the working class interest. This process will occur at a rapid rate if there is a barrier keeping the intellectual proletarian from achieving their class interest. This is one of the reasons why the sit-in movement of the 1960s and 61 and the freedom rides occurred. The new developing intelligentsia of Negro college students, unlike in the past, were students from working class backgrounds, ascending to a new material status. They saw the contradictions of being able to have higher income status, but yet an inferior social status. Now we see what led to the sit-in movements, the freedom ride movements would blow and bloom or blossom into what is the full-fledged civil rights movement. But what led this? The doctor says that there was an influx of Negro college students that came from the working class, in a lot of instances, probably the first. They were a lot of first. And they went, and their parents bit into the American dream. Why not? If I send my child to college, if I send my child to school, they will have or be afforded better opportunities. And so they sent these children to school, worked, toiled, broke their back. Many of them probably couldn't read past fourth or fifth grade, if at all. And they sent their children to school, and the children went to school and got these phenomenal certificates or phenomenal educations, and came back and still were restricted, still had barriers placed in their way, unable to exercise upward mobility, unable to propel. So this is what began that dissatisfaction, clearly showed the contradictions. They were not from the old guard African-American middle-class families who had compromised social agitation in order to have a superior economic position. American middle class had rebelled against tradition and was starting a new trend. This man was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who had a middle-class background, but who identified with mass struggle in Montgomery. In 1955 and 1966, who identified with mass struggle in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955 and 1956. The movement used nonviolent direct action tactics to achieve its objectives, and Dr. King soon rose to become its professional spokesman. He later became the most influential, quote, Negro leader. He brought with him a battery of young ministers, frustrated because they could not obtain the social status of white petty bourgeoisie middle class. This can be viewed as the beginning of a social process of frustrated middle class intellectuals beginning to return to the masses. Most of the students in the sit-in movements in the 1960s were aspiring middle-class students who were concerned over the contradictions they faced by submitting to the racist Jim Crow system. They sincerely wanted full equality, assimilation into the American mainstream of American life, and they wanted to become petty bourgeois. But most of the leadership of the sit-in movements were of the working class background. They soon formed an organization of their own and became more radical than the bulk of the sit-inners. The social process had gone so far that the student movement's vanguard, SNCC, SNCC, new leadership advocated armed self-defense, the philosophy of Robert F. Williams, but by 1966. Brother Malcolm X in 1964 popularized the philosophy of armed self-defense and worked in coordination with Robert F. Williams. African-American students in 1967 demonstrated across the country in different forms. The 1967 rebellion in the Negro colleges were against the administrative policy of the Negro college administrators, and then directed against the state. When the state sent its army to suppress them, the rebellions ranged from expelling a professor, academy quality, to protesting against the draft at Howard University. These rebellions were interlocked with a wave of urban rebellions on the part of the people connected with the Black Power movement, and had the potential of becoming the vanguard of the African-American political cultural revolution. On November 17, 1966, 4,000 African-American high school students demonstrated for the inclusion of African-American history in the public school curriculum in Philadelphia. The radicalization process had reached the working class youth. Yeah. So, short class. I'm going to end it there. That's it on our Black Intelligetsia. That's the part 4. Had I known it was this short, I'd have slammed it into part 3. But I appreciate everyone hanging out. Come with me. Next week, we'll be coming back, analysis of the African American liberation movement as a social movement. That'll be what I'll be sharing. Maybe, who knows? I may even start up a little bit later today to do that for us. But until then, man, I'm going to leave you as I greeted you. And that's all powers to oppressed people, African power to an African people, and Black power. Oh, by the way, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Tell your people this is where political education is going down. donate. Says Yanga, but absolutely Yanga's doing the thing. If not to Yanga, if you're in Atlanta, People's TV, donate to People's TV. You can find us www.peoplestv.org. Donate. Let's keep the voice of the people going. Anybody from Atlanta knows that this has been the voice of Atlanta, man, all the way from Jose Williams. There's not really a political activist in Atlanta that has held their weight that hasn't come through People TV. This is the voice of the people. Again, we're asking for the donations at People's TV. If not to Yang and Krumah, you can go to People's TV website and donate directly to People TV. It is www.peoplestv.org. Definitely check that out. If you're in Atlanta, Channel 24 support. What else is going on? Man, everything's going on. If not financially support, go out and support your community. Go out. You know what? Go meet a neighbor. Do you know your neighbor's name? Do you know your neighbor's name? Go meet a neighbor, shake a hand, get some young people together, get some older people to clean up some trash in your community. Let's today be interactive. Let's develop on our social cultural interaction to lead into a social cultural revolution, which I believe, through my studies, I believe, is the first of any revolution. Social cultural interaction. Social cultural interaction. How do we interact with one another? Is it productive? Is it edifying? Is it beneficial? Is it inspirational? Is it motivational? Does it encourage us to be right and exact, to be the wonderful, melanated beings that we are? Do we inspire that, not just within ourselves, but with one another when we come into contact? All of this is part of the revolution. So absolutely. Charitable works. Going out giving charity. Like I said, cleaning. If you know people in your neighborhood, assisting people, the elderly, whatever you, let's go out and do it. Let's be busy. Let's be productive. Again, I said I was signing off. I get in my tirades because this is very important. I can't stress it enough. I can't overemphasize it enough. I can't stress it enough. I can't overemphasize it enough. Actual tangible work. Anyway, yeah, shouts out to Denver, to Che and Krumah, Lady Che, that's actually out there doing the damn thing. And any group that's out there in those trenches trying to do it. There it goes. That was my spiel. With that, man, let's try it again. I'm going to leave you as I greeted you. That's all powers to oppressed people, African power to an African people, and Black power.